The afternoon sun cast a soft glow over Washington, D.C., filtering through the tall windows of Karoline Leavitt's apartment. At just 27, she had already made history as the youngest White House press secretary. Her apartment, located a short distance from the White House, reflected her meticulous nature, documents neatly stacked, outfits pre-selected for the week, a routine as structured as the job she had mastered. Dressed casually in a navy blue blazer, white shirt, and black slacks, she leaned back on her leather couch, scrolling through headlines. The silver cross pinned to her lapel, a quiet but unwavering mark of her faith from her hometown in New Hampshire, glimmered under the warm light. Her phone rang. She sat up straight the moment she saw the caller ID, the president. "Caroline, there's a case at the D.C. local court. A group of Christians is suing over a public prayer ban. It could be big. I need you to be my eyes there." The urgency in his voice left no room for hesitation. "On it, sir." No sooner had she hung up than she was already moving. Within minutes, she grabbed her document bag, slipped on a pair of low heels, and stepped into the crisp afternoon air. Her black SUV waited downstairs. The moment she slid inside, she instructed the driver to head straight for the courthouse. As the city blurred past the window, she turned on NPR. The usual mix of politics and policy played, but her mind was elsewhere. This wasn't just another case to monitor. It hit closer to home. She clicked off the radio and tightened her grip on her phone. The drive to the courthouse was short, but felt longer in the thick D.C. traffic. As they neared the building, she noticed the growing cluster of people outside, some reporters, others just curious onlookers. She adjusted the cross on her blazer, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the SUV. The courthouse doors swung open to reveal a crowded, almost stifling interior. The murmur of conversations, the rhythmic clacking of keyboards from the clerk's desk, and the occasional echo of a gavel from a nearby courtroom created a chaotic symphony of bureaucracy. Caroline scanned the room. The people waiting ranged from traffic violators to those tangled in property disputes. A man in a faded t-shirt reading "King of My Castle" scrolled on his phone. To her right, a woman wearing a necklace so large it could double as a chandelier whispered hurriedly to her attorney. She took a seat in the middle row, placing her document bag beside her. Just a few minutes remained before the case started. As she reached for her phone to take notes, she felt the weight of several eyes on her. At first, she ignored it. Being recognized was part of the job. But then she noticed something peculiar. They weren't looking at her. They were looking at the cross. She brushed the thought aside, shifting her focus back to the courtroom's entrance. Then the wooden door behind the judge's bench creaked open, and a hush fell over the room. Judge William Harland entered, his black robe perfectly pressed, salt and pepper hair slicked back, wire-rimmed glasses perched low on his nose. His presence alone demanded authority. "All rise." The bailiff's deep voice echoed through the chamber. Caroline stood, phone still in hand, her sharp eyes studying the judge's every move. Harlan took his seat, scanning the room with a gaze as cold as the marble pillars framing the courtroom. Without missing a beat, he launched into the day's docket, handling each case with mechanical efficiency. A man fined $50 for parking in the wrong spot. No argument. A woman late on rent payments, a light warning. Case after case moved swiftly, his tone firm, unyielding. Then, just as she was noting the speed of his rulings, his eyes landed on her. His gaze lingered, flipping through a few pages on his desk before he set them down. Miss Leavitt. A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. A few heads turned. Some recognized her name. Others just sensed something was off in the judge's tone. Caroline remained composed, meeting his stare without flinching. "Sir." His eyes flickered to her lapel. That cross. Her fingers instinctively brushed against it. His tone sharpened. "This is a court of law, not a place to display religious symbols." A silence thicker than before settled over the room. Caroline's mind worked fast. No prohibitive sign hung on the walls. No rule had been mentioned against religious items. She straightened her posture. I'm here in my official capacity as the White House press secretary, observing a public case. This is a personal item protected under the First Amendment. Harlan's lips pressed into a thin line. Work or not, you're in my courtroom, and in my courtroom we maintain neutrality. That means no religious displays. He tapped his gavel once as if cementing his point. Karoline clenched her phone a little tighter. Neutrality. Her gaze flickered around the room. The man in the King of My Castle t-shirt sat relaxed, undisturbed. The woman with the oversized necklace adjusted the heavy piece of jewelry draped around her neck. But it was her cross that was a problem. She took a slow breath. Sir, I respect the authority of this court, but if there's a specific rule against my attire, I'd like to see it in writing. Harlan's expression darkened. I don't need to show you anything. You're making a scene. Step up to the bench. Now. The murmurs grew louder. The tension in the room thickened, pressing against her like the humidity of a storm about to break. Karoline knew she had just stepped into something bigger than a routine case. This wasn't just about a courtroom policy. This was about something much deeper. If you're still watching, hit that like button now. One tap is all it takes to support me. Judge William Harlan adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and leaned forward slightly, scanning the room with a gaze sharp enough to cut through steel. The silence in the courtroom deepened as he tapped his gavel twice against the wooden bench. His presence alone commanded order, cold, rigid, unwavering. Karoline Leavitt kept her posture straight, her phone resting lightly in her hand as she took notes. Her expression remained neutral, unreadable, as she analyzed the judge's pattern. He ran this courtroom like a machine, efficient but detached, handling cases with rapid precision. She had seen plenty of strong-willed officials before, but then his eyes found her again. The moment stretched longer than it should have. Harlan's gaze flickered downward, settling on the small silver cross pinned to her blazer. His fingers tensed around the gavel before he set it down and leaned forward. Miss Leavitt. His voice was measured, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it. Karoline lifted her chin slightly. Yes, Your Honor, that cross. She barely reacted. Her fingers rested on the document bag beside her, her focus unwavering. His tone sharpened. This is a court of law, not a church. Religious symbols have no place in a neutral courtroom. Karoline caught the briefest shift in the room's atmosphere. The murmur of conversations had slowed. A few heads turned in her direction. She remained composed. No written rule prohibits religious attire in this courtroom, Your Honor. Harlan exhaled sharply as if annoyed by the challenge. Neutrality must be maintained. That means no personal beliefs on display. You should know that. She glanced around. The man in the King of My Castle t-shirt remained seated, scrolling through his phone. The woman with the oversized necklace, so large it shimmered under the fluorescent lights, whispered something to her lawyer, untouched by any critique. Her cross, however, was a problem. Karoline squared her shoulders. I'm here in my official capacity as the White House press secretary, observing a public hearing. My cross is a personal item protected by the First Amendment. Harlan's expression darkened. His fingers curled around the gavel again. Work or not, you're in my courtroom, and I will not have distractions in my courtroom. Karoline's grip on her phone tightened slightly. Distractions? A cross the size of a dime was a distraction. Your Honor, I am not disrupting the court in any way. If there is an official restriction on religious attire, I would like to see it in writing. The murmurs in the courtroom grew. Harlan's jaw clenched. You don't need to see anything. You're making a scene. Step up to the bench. Now a ripple of tension spread through the room. Karoline let out a slow breath. She had handled heated press briefings, navigated political storms, even sparred with some of the most aggressive reporters in Washington. But this wasn't about words or policy. This was about power. She rose to her feet. Her heels clicked lightly against the old wooden floor as she stepped forward, each movement deliberate. The room, once filled with the restless hum of waiting cases, had turned silent. The bailiff, James Wilson, a tall man with a stoic expression, watched closely. Mrs. Thompson, the middle-aged clerk who had been typing steadily moments ago, slowed her fingers as her gaze darted between Karoline and the judge. Harlan's face remained stern. His grip on the gavel tightened. Standing at the defendant's stand, Karoline met his gaze head-on. "Now explain to me why you think it's acceptable to wear that in my courtroom." His voice was lower now, but not softer, measured, calculated. "Sir, I have already stated my reasoning. My cross does not violate any court policies, nor does it disrupt these proceedings." Harlan scoffed. "Don't lecture me on policy, Miss Leavitt. You are in contempt of court for failing to comply with a direct instruction from the bench." Karoline didn't blink. Contempt of court? For wearing a cross? The crowd murmured again, louder this time. Someone in the back whispered, "Did he just say contempt?" "Your Honor, contempt requires deliberate defiance or disruption of court proceedings. I have done neither." Harlan's nostrils flared. "You think you can argue your way out of this? I'm simply stating legal facts, sir." Harlan slammed the gavel against the desk, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. "Enough. You will pay a $500 fine payable before you leave today. Let's see if that teaches you to respect courtroom decorum." A gasp rippled through the room. Mrs. Thompson looked up from her keyboard, her fingers pausing mid-motion. The man in the King of My Castle t-shirt leaned back in his chair, eyebrows raised. The woman with the oversized necklace stopped whispering and turned, eyes wide. Karoline stood still, processing the moment. A fine, $500. Not for speaking out of turn, not for breaking procedure, for a cross. She exhaled slowly. She had prepared for difficult moments in her career, but this was a defining one. With a steady hand, she adjusted her phone, ensuring the recording function remained on. "Your Honor, I will pay the fine if you enforce the same ruling for every visible display of personal beliefs in this courtroom." Harlan's face darkened. "Do not test me, Miss Leavitt." Karoline nodded slightly. "That's exactly what I thought." A young woman near the back leaned over to her friend and whispered, "He's digging himself a hole." Harlan straightened, clearly sensing he was losing control. "You will not turn this courtroom into a spectacle." "Respectfully, sir, that decision was yours when you singled me out." The tension in the air was palpable. Harlan's fingers flexed around the gavel, his knuckles white. His lips parted slightly as if searching for a response, but nothing came. The silence stretched. Then Karoline spoke again, her voice calm but deliberate. "If I am to be fined for a religious symbol, I ask that you hold others in this courtroom to the same standard. Otherwise, Your Honor, this is not about neutrality. This is about bias." Another ripple of murmurs spread across the room. Harlan's hand twitched. He was cornered, and he knew it. Mrs. Thompson, who had worked in this court for 12 years, swallowed hard as she typed. This wasn't normal. This wasn't procedure. James Wilson, the bailiff, shifted his stance slightly, arms crossed as he studied Harlan's face. Karoline stood firm, eyes unwavering, the cross on her blazer catching the light. The gavel slammed down again. "Enough. This discussion is over. Pay the fine and sit down." Karoline's expression didn't change. "I will pay, sir, but this isn't over." For the first time since he entered the courtroom, Harlan hesitated. And at that moment, Karoline knew. She had already won the first battle. A thick silence settled over the courtroom, heavy as stone. Karoline Leavitt didn't move, didn't flinch. The gavel had fallen, the fine had been issued, but the real fight had only just begun. The murmurs in the crowd swelled. People weren't just watching, they were witnessing. Some shook their heads, others whispered to one another. Even the ones who had been indifferent when they walked in were now sensing that something wasn't right. Karoline locked eyes with Judge William Harland. The tension in the air was almost tangible. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady but firm, I want it on record that I am being fined $500 not for disrupting this court but for wearing a religious symbol." Harlan scoffed, his grip tightening on the gavel. "You were fined for failing to comply with court neutrality." "Neutrality," she repeated. Her gaze flickered to the oversized necklace still sparkling on the woman's chest, to the man still relaxed in his King of My Castle t-shirt, to the clerk, Mrs. Thompson, who was typing slower than before, her expression strained. She turned back to Harlan. "Then why am I the only one being fined?" A pause, a crack in his rigid authority. The murmurs grew louder. Someone in the back muttered, "She's got a point." Harlan's jaw tensed. "I don't have to explain myself to you." That was his mistake. Karoline inhaled calmly. "Then allow me to explain something to you, Your Honor." She reached into her document bag and pulled out her White House credentials, flipping them open so that the seal was clear for all to see. The ripple of recognition was immediate. The man in the King of My Castle t-shirt sat up straighter. The woman with the oversized necklace whispered furiously to her lawyer. Even James Wilson, the bailiff, shifted slightly where he stood, tilting his head with new interest. Harlan's expression flickered, anger, then hesitation. Karoline let the moment hang. "I am Karoline Leavitt, Press Secretary of the United States, serving directly under the President." Her words rang through the courtroom like a bell. "I was sent here to observe a case regarding religious liberty, and yet before that case has even begun, I've been fined for exercising my own First Amendment rights." Harlan exhaled sharply. "I don't care who you are." "You should." Karoline's voice remained calm even. "Because now this isn't just a courtroom decision, it's a constitutional violation." The room was electric. Harlan shifted in his chair. "You're twisting this into something it's not." "No, Your Honor." She straightened her stance. "I'm reminding you what the law actually says." She raised her phone slightly, not enough to seem aggressive, but enough for him to see the red recording indicator still glowing on the screen. Harlan's eyes darted toward it. "I have recorded everything from the moment you questioned my cross to this very exchange," she continued. "That recording is now in the hands of my White House colleagues, as well as my legal team." Harlan's fingers twitched. Mrs. Thompson stopped typing entirely. James Wilson's brow lifted just slightly, a flicker of approval in his otherwise blank expression. Karoline pressed forward. "Your Honor, do you know what Church of Lukumi Babalu I versus City of Hialeah, 1993 ruled?" A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "It ruled," she continued smoothly, "that any government action restricting religious expression without justifiable cause is unconstitutional. That includes bans, fines, or punishments for religious attire." A heavy pause. "And what justifiable cause have you provided for my fine, sir?" Silence. The courtroom was now a powder keg waiting to ignite. A man in the back row whispered, "She just backed him into a corner." Harlan's throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Miss Leavitt," Karoline lifted her hand slightly. "Let me finish. A press secretary commanding a judge in his own courtroom. I have been fined for wearing a cross while others in this room wear expressive attire without consequence. I have been threatened with contempt for stating legal facts, and now, Your Honor, you find yourself at a crossroads." She let her words settle. "Because I promise you, this fine won't go unnoticed. This recording will be heard, and every legal and constitutional expert in the country will be analyzing your decision within the next hour." The weight of her words pressed down on the room. Harlan's face reddened. "You are out of line." Karoline tilted her head slightly. "Am I?" For the first time, he looked uncertain. James Wilson exhaled slowly, his stance still rigid but his eyes now openly observant. Mrs. Thompson bit her lip, hands frozen above the keyboard. The tension snapped when a young woman near the back suddenly muttered, "This is insane." Another voice whispered, "She's right." The room was turning against him. Harlan knew it. His grip on the gavel was so tight that his knuckles had turned white. I will not have this court become a stage for theatrics. Karoline gave a small, knowing smile. Then perhaps, Your Honor, you should have thought twice before making me your target. Another beat of silence. A man 2 rows back took out his phone, ignoring the no filming rule, and discreetly took a photo. The moment was now documented, whether Harlan liked it or not. Karoline watched as the judge shifted, struggling to regain control. He exhaled, running a hand over his forehead as if wiping away sweat. Then he made his move. I'll withdraw the fine, he muttered stiffly, setting the gavel down with careful precision. There's no need to escalate this further. The murmurs erupted into something bigger. Gasps, whispers, even a few hushed claps. Mrs. Thompson blinked rapidly, typing again as if trying to keep up with history in real time. James Wilson smirked. Karoline stayed exactly where she was. She wasn't done. Your Honor, withdrawing it now only proves I was right. Harlan inhaled sharply. And that, she said, voice cool, raises a much bigger question. How many others have been fined in this courtroom for wearing religious symbols? How many were not given a second chance? That was the final blow. The courtroom exploded with hushed conversations. Harlan looked like he had been struck. Mrs. Thompson stared at her screen, realizing the implications. James Wilson gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Karoline turned slightly, scanning the room. The power had shifted. Harlan was no longer the authority figure. He was the man being called to answer, and he had nothing left to say. Karoline Leavitt stepped out of the D.C. courthouse and into the late afternoon air. The sun had started its descent, casting a golden glow over the city, but inside, the fire had just been lit. She pulled out her phone, tapped a few buttons, and sent the recording directly to the White House. Message to Trump's senior advisor, fined for wearing a cross, cited First Amendment. Judge backed down, recording attached. Next steps? Her thumb hovered for a brief second before she hit send. The SUV pulled up, but before she could step inside, a young reporter dashed toward her. Miss Leavitt, are you confirming that Judge Harlan fined you for wearing a cross in court? Karoline met his eyes. I think the facts speak for themselves. Click, click, click. The cameras flashed. Within seconds, the news cycle had begun. She slid into the car, shut the door, and watched as her phone lit up with notifications. 6:45 p.m. The internet erupts. By the time Karoline arrived back at the White House, Jacker Crossing Court was already trending on X, formerly Twitter. 10,000 tweets, 20,000 tweets, 50,000 in under an hour. A video clip surfaced, a low-quality but crystal-clear recording from inside the courtroom. Someone had filmed it despite the rules. It showed Karoline standing her ground, her calm but forceful voice echoing as she quoted the 1993 Supreme Court precedent. One user posted, Judge fines White House press secretary $500 for a cross. She fights back with the law and wins. This is insane. Crossing Court. The post racked up over 100,000 likes in under an hour. Another account, one of the biggest conservative influencers, retweeted the video with the caption, This is what happens when you know your rights. Karoline Leavitt just exposed a corrupt judge for targeting religious freedom. Engagement exploded. But it wasn't just conservative voices. Legal analysts chimed in. Journalists from mainstream outlets started digging. Some defended Harlan, arguing for courtroom neutrality, while others questioned his past rulings. Then came the moment that took it from viral to unstoppable. 7:30 p.m., Trump joins the fight. Karoline was reviewing legal briefings in her office when her phone vibrated twice in quick succession. Trump had tweeted, And real Donald Trump, Karoline Leavitt, my amazing press secretary, just schooled a leftist judge on the Constitution. Legal genius. We will never let them take our faith. Crossing Court. The post hit 50,000 retweets in 10 minutes. Cable news picked it up immediately. Fox News ran a breaking headline, White House press secretary. stands up for religious freedom in courtroom clash. Conservative commentators praised her composure. Some called her the defender of faith. Others said she had exposed institutional bias. Meanwhile, liberal networks spun a different angle. CNN's evening panel debated the case, with one commentator arguing, "This is being exaggerated for political purposes. No one is banning religion. This was about courtroom protocol." Another pushed back. "But why was only the cross targeted? That's the issue." Karoline set her phone down. She had expected backlash, but she also knew the truth was now out in the open. 8 p.m., the White House responds. Trump's chief of staff called. Press conference, tonight. The president wants to go on offense. Karoline exhaled. "I'll prep statements." Before she could even get off the call, a staffer rushed in with a folder. "Miss Leavitt, you need to see this." She opened it. Judicial complaints against Harland. Over a dozen complaints filed in the past 3 years. Pattern, targeting religious expressions. Case 1, a Catholic woman fined for wearing a rosary in court. Case 2, a Muslim man scolded for wearing a kufi. Case 3, a Jewish attorney reprimanded for a Star of David lapel pin, yet no records of fines for T-shirts, slogans, or oversized jewelry. Karoline's eyes flickered upward. Where did this come from? The staffer hesitated. 2 sources, James Wilson, the bailiff, and Mrs. Thompson, the clerk. She absorbed that information. Court staff stepping forward. This was bigger than just her case. This was systemic. 9 p.m., Judge Harland under fire. As Karoline prepped for the White House press conference, news broke. D.C. Judicial Council opens ethics review into Judge William Harland amid allegations of religious bias. Harland's name was everywhere now. Legal analysts dissected his past rulings. Conservative figures called for his resignation. Harland himself? Silent. 9:30 p.m., press conference. Begins. The White House briefing room was packed. Cameras flashed as Karoline took the podium, standing tall, the cross still pinned to her blazer. She adjusted the mic. Yesterday, I attended a court hearing in my official capacity as White House press secretary. I was not there to make headlines. I was there to observe. However, I was fined $500, not for speaking out of turn, not for disrupting proceedings, but for wearing a cross. She paused. I stated the law. I cited Supreme Court precedent. And when the judge realized he had no legal ground, he backed down. The cameras clicked furiously. Make no mistake, this is not just about one fine. This is about a pattern of judicial overreach targeting religious expression. She lifted the folder of documented cases. And now we have evidence that this isn't the first time. Complaints have been filed, stories have been ignored, until now. The room buzzed. Reporters exchanged glances. Karoline closed with one final statement. This is not about politics. It is about constitutional rights, and I will not stop fighting for them. The room erupted in shouted questions, but Karoline had already won. 10 p.m., fallout begins. Harland's office released a statement. Judge Harland maintains his commitment to court neutrality and denies any bias. It was weak, too late. By midnight, legal scholars and ethics committees were calling for a full review of his rulings. Mrs. Thompson, the longtime court clerk, gave an anonymous statement to a local paper. I've worked with him for over a decade. This is not new. James Wilson followed up. I counted at least 20 cases where religious symbols were punished. That's not neutrality, that's a pattern. And then came the final blow. An investigative journalist uncovered court transcripts where Harland had openly criticized religious expressions in prior cases. By morning, his position was hanging by a thread. The next day, X explodes again. Crossing Court surpasses 1 million tweets. Legal experts on both sides debated what would come next. Would Harland resign? Would the courts change? One thing was certain. Karoline had changed the conversation, and it was far from over. By morning, the D.C. Judicial Council had no choice but to act. The firestorm surrounding Judge William Harland had grown too intense to ignore. A formal investigation was launched, and a team of legal analysts led by senior investigator Linda Martinez began combing through Harland's past rulings. What they found was damning. 70% of Harland's fines over the past 3 years had been issued against individuals wearing religious symbols. Even worse, Christian symbols were penalized 80% more harshly than any other personal attire violations. In one case, a Catholic woman had been fined for wearing a rosary, while another defendant, wearing a graphic T-shirt with profane language, had been let off with a verbal warning. A Muslim man had been scolded for wearing a kufi in court, told it was inappropriate for a legal setting. A Jewish attorney had been reprimanded for a Star of David lapel pin, despite no official dress code banning it. But no records existed of similar fines for slogan T-shirts, oversized jewelry, or any other non-religious expression. The bias was clear, indisputable. Harland under pressure. As news of the investigation spread, Harland's office fell silent. His judicial colleagues distanced themselves. The Bar Association called for accountability. Ethics panels convened. At the D.C. courthouse, James Wilson, the bailiff, spoke quietly to reporters. "I've worked under Harland for 15 years. I've seen him laugh off ridiculous T-shirts in court but slam down the gavel the second a religious symbol came into play. We all saw it, but no one wanted to be the one to say it. Mrs. Thompson, the longtime court clerk, came forward too. I have transcripts, I've kept notes. This wasn't a one-time event." With court records, testimonies, and statistics piling up, the Judicial Council had enough. Within 48 hours, Judge William Harland was suspended pending a final ruling. By day 4, he resigned. Harland breaks his silence. Sitting in his home office, Harland finally released a statement to the press. "I have served as a judge for over 3 decades. While I never intended bias, I now realize that my approach to courtroom neutrality was flawed. I deeply regret any actions that may have unintentionally penalized individuals for their religious beliefs. It was a carefully worded attempt at damage control, too little, too late. Public sentiment had already shifted. People weren't just talking about Harland, they were talking about the system. If one judge had this pattern, how many others? The reform begins. By the end of the week, the D.C. Judicial Council announced new court regulations. 1. No bans on religious symbols unless they cause an actual disruption. 2. Judges and court staff must undergo First Amendment training. 3. Transparency measures, including quarterly reviews of courtroom fines and rulings. Karoline Leavitt read the announcement in her White House office, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just about her fine anymore. This was real change. Her phone buzzed. Trump's senior advisor. "The president wants a statement from you. Something official." She nodded, already knowing what to say. The White House victory lap. The next morning, Trump stood at the White House podium, Karoline beside him. "My press secretary, Karoline Leavitt, showed courage and legal genius in the face of a corrupt judge," Trump declared, his voice booming. This wasn't just about her. This was about religious freedom in America. And thanks to her, the courts are changing. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Karoline stepped forward. "This isn't about one judge. This is about protecting the First Amendment for every American." The crowd erupted in applause. By mid-afternoon, headlines dominated the news cycle. Fox News, White House press. Secretary forces court reform after religious freedom clash. CNN, D.C. courts. Overhaul religious attire policy following investigation. The Washington Post, judge resigns amid bias allegations. National debate on religion in courtrooms intensifies on X, formerly Twitter. Surrey Crossing Court surged past 1.5 million mentions. Karoline scrolled through the posts. People weren't just reacting, they were mobilizing. The movement spreads nationwide. What started in D.C. didn't stay in D.C. By week's end, Texas, Florida, and Ohio announced reviews of their own court policies regarding religious expression. Texas Governor Greg Abbott tweeted, Religious freedom is non-negotiable in Texas. We're reviewing court policies statewide to ensure this never happens here. Thanks to Karoline Leavitt for leading the charge. Florida lawmakers proposed a bill requiring all judges to undergo First Amendment training before taking the bench. A group of attorneys in Ohio filed a petition demanding a full audit of past courtroom fines related to religious symbols. Even liberal-leaning states couldn't ignore the shift. California's Judicial Ethics Committee announced they would examine judicial neutrality standards to ensure fair treatment for all citizens. The ripple effect was undeniable. Harlan's next move, a surprising turn. Despite his resignation, Harlan wasn't done. 3 weeks later, he made a stunning announcement. I have been asked to participate in First Amendment training for judges and court staff. I have accepted. The media erupted. Disgraced judge to teach religious freedom? Is this redemption or damage control? Some called it performative. Others saw it as a genuine step toward reform. Karoline? She wasn't concerned with his motives. She was focused on results. If even the man at the center of this storm was learning, it meant the movement had already won. The lasting impact. By the time the dust settled, a plaque was installed inside the D.C. courthouse. Justice honors all faiths, religious freedom beyond violation. It stood as a permanent reminder of what had happened. Karoline visited it one morning, running her fingers lightly over the engraving. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Miss Leavitt, I'm a law student. I was always afraid to challenge bias in the system, but you showed me that one person can make a difference. I'm starting a legal aid clinic for religious discrimination cases. Thank you. She stared at the words. A slow, proud smile spread across her face. Final words from the White House. 3 months later, Karoline stood at the White House podium once again. This time, she wasn't just responding to a crisis. She was announcing a national First Amendment awareness initiative. The press room was packed. Her voice was steady as she spoke. 3 months ago, I was fined for wearing a cross in a courtroom. A pause. Today, we have changed the system. Applause rippled through the room. Outside, people held signs with the hashtag #CrossInCourt, wearing crosses, Star of David pins, Islamic badges, and other religious symbols, a powerful display of solidarity. Karoline looked out at the movement she had sparked, and she knew this was only the beginning. The movement didn't fade. It grew. In the weeks following the courtroom incident, Karoline Leavitt's name became synonymous with religious resilience. Her face was on every major news outlet, her story dissected on talk shows, legal panels, and political debates. But beyond the media frenzy, something deeper was happening. People across the country began sharing their own stories of being reprimanded for wearing a cross in a government office, a hijab at work, a yarmulke in a school setting. One post on X, formerly Twitter, read, I was told to remove my cross necklace in high school or face detention. I complied because I was scared. Seeing Karoline stand up gives me hope for the future, #CrossInCourt. Another from a Muslim woman. I was once told my hijab made people uncomfortable in a courtroom. I was never fined, but I was shamed. Thank you, Karoline, for exposing this hypocrisy. The hashtag number sign. My Faith, My Right emerged alongside number sign #CrossInCourt, uniting people across religious backgrounds. Religious freedom was no longer just a political talking point, it was a movement. Karoline hits the road, a new voice in the national conversation. What started as a courtroom battle had transformed into a national speaking tour. Invitations poured in from universities, faith-based organizations, and legal conferences. Karoline spoke at Georgetown University, addressing law students about constitutional rights. She appeared at Liberty University, where she received a standing ovation before she even spoke a word. She took the stage at a faith and law summit in Texas, looking out at an audience of 5,000 people holding religious symbols high in the air, crosses, prayer beads, Star of David pendants, all lifted in a show of defiance and solidarity. She wasn't just telling her story anymore. She was mobilizing a generation. A permanent mark on the courthouse one morning, Karoline returned to DC's local courthouse, the site where everything began. This time she wasn't alone. A plaque had been installed in the lobby, a direct result of her case and the subsequent court reforms. It read, "Justice honors all faiths, religious freedom beyond violation." She ran her fingers across the inscription. James Wilson, the bailiff who had quietly supported her during the courtroom showdown, stood beside her. He exhaled, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd see something like this in this building." Mrs. Thompson, the longtime court clerk, was also there, misty-eyed. "A year ago, I was typing fines for religious violations. Now we're preventing them." Karoline smiled. That's how change happens. A local news crew filmed the moment. Within hours, the image of Karoline standing next to the plaque went viral. Personal messages. Flood in Karoline's White House inbox overflowed, not with policy memos, but with letters from law students, attorneys, and everyday citizens inspired by her stand. One letter stood out. A third-year law student from California wrote, "Miss Leavitt, I was always afraid to challenge bias in the legal system, but you showed me that one person can make a difference. I'm starting a legal aid clinic for religious discrimination cases. Thank you." She read it twice, letting the weight of it settle. This fight wasn't just about one courtroom, one judge, or one fine. It was about empowering the next generation to stand up for their rights. Harlan's redemption arc. Few expected Judge William Harlan to emerge from this scandal with anything but disgrace. But 3 months after his resignation, he made a surprising decision. Harlan agreed to participate in First Amendment training for judges and court staff, the very program implemented because of his case. He gave a rare interview, sitting in a dimly lit office, his face worn but reflective. "I spent my career believing I was upholding neutrality," he admitted. "But I see now that I was enforcing bias instead. I was wrong." Karoline Leavitt taught me a lesson in the courtroom that day, a lesson I should have learned years ago. Some dismissed it as damage control, but others saw it as growth. And for Karoline, she didn't need an apology. She just needed the system to change, and it had. Leading national reform, Karoline's next chapter. By the time 6 months had passed, Karoline wasn't just speaking at events, she was leading policy changes. The White House appointed her to head a national First Amendment reform initiative focusing on training programs for judges, attorneys, and court staff on religious neutrality, annual judicial audits to track fines related to religious expression, a hotline for citizens to report courtroom discrimination. She met with state governors, urging them to adopt similar reforms. She testified before Congress, advocating for stronger protections against religious discrimination in legal settings. Her efforts gained bipartisan support. Even critics of Trump's administration admitted Karoline Leavitt is leading one of the most effective First Amendment initiatives in recent history. The final reflection. A movement ignited. 3 months later, Karoline stood on the White House balcony, gazing out at the city. The sun was setting, washing the Capitol in gold. She held the framed receipt of her $500 fine in one hand. She smiled. What had started as a moment of defiance in a courtroom had grown into a national movement. She had walked into a hostile courtroom alone. Now millions stood beside her. Her phone buzzed, a message from Trump. "Karoline, you're my warrior, keep it up." She exhaled, setting the phone down. This wasn't about one victory. It was about the fight that continued. Because freedom isn't free, it takes fighters. And now, thanks to her, a new generation was ready to stand. The fight for religious freedom isn't just Karoline's story, it's a movement. One that challenges bias, defends constitutional rights, and ensures that no one is punished for their faith. If you believe in standing up for what's right, share this video. Let others see the power of knowledge, resilience, and speaking out. And if you don't want to miss more stories that expose injustice and ignite change, hit that subscribe button now. Turn on notifications so you're always the first to know, because this isn't just a conversation, it's a movement, and it starts with you.